Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining. As Wendy said, I'm an art historian and a curator, and my research has been focused on the history of computational art since I started my postgraduate studies in London over a decade ago. My passion for computer art and its pioneers continued thanks to my first research fellowship in collaboration with the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where I was invited to join an AHRC project to research the collection of computer art that American art historian Patrick Prince donated to the museum. This collection now forms the core of the digital art collection of the V&A and one of the largest computer art collections in the country. So I was lucky enough to research this collection from the very beginning, and this allowed me to expand my knowledge and passion for this subject. At that time, I realized that not much research had been done, in particular from an art historical perspective, on the pioneers of computational art. So I decided to concentrate my efforts in studying their work and in giving these artists a voice. Because through their voice and through their work, I felt I could trace the history, or one histories in particular, of media art. So one of the results of my research was the publication of my first book, which I don't have here, but I have a slide. So you can see at least the cover with Routledge in 2018. And this is the first monograph of Ernest Edmonds, who is a pioneer of algorithmic art. I was particularly interested in understanding the intersections between the recent developments in computational art, of which Ernest is a pioneer, and past traditions such as constructivism and systems art. But what I found out during this process was a much more dense history that includes an artist's personal evolution from figurative art to color abstraction and computer-based experimentation. And in many cases, his work has offered challenges that have helped and encouraged the development of new technologies that bring life to research in technology and new media art. My approach has always been that of a traditional art historian, looking for the original sources and trying to understand the context in which an artist or a movement has formed. So this book represents my contribution to the field of art history. And the main challenge I set myself was to integrate computational art into traditional art historiography. So from this point on, I decided to expand my area of research and to consider an international group of pioneers of computer art, which is sometimes known as the algorists. And I try to illustrate this movement, or the history of the movement, in several ways. And today I'd like to show you basically two ways in which I did it. One is an exhibition that I curated in Venice 2 years ago in my hometown. And the other is a short video documentary about my curatorial experience there. Some of you, sorry, you've seen it already this morning, but you will see it again. But before I start talking about algorithmic science, I'd like to go back to the history of contemporary art in Venice that will help understanding the context in which I found myself working in. Contemporary art in Venice has a relatively long history that dates back to the first Biennale in 1895. And here you see a picture showing the opening at the Giardini. But the first Biennales had a tendency to celebrate the official academic style or salon art. They were far from being innovative, and they had a conservative attitude towards art. However, this original character of the Biennale gradually changed, particularly in the early 20th century, with the introduction of the National Commissioner, which is roughly what we call now the curator of the foreign pavilions. But it is also the introduction of new technologies in art from the mid-60s that helped the Biennale to take distance from its original 19th century salon art model. One of the great examples is the 1970 Biennale, and that was the first step for this institution in the long journey towards the acceptance of computer art. Here I've got some pictures representing 1966, which is another historical moment for the Biennale, when Julio Leparc won the Best Painting Prize for works that basically did not have any paint on it at all. So here you see a series of mirrors, reflections, glasses, that the audience was invited to wear and to play with. Here you see Julio Leparc wearing these glasses himself. Here, gallerist Denise René, who was representing France through Julio Leparc's work, wearing Julio's mirror glasses. So basically with these works, he wins the Best Painting Prize, and this kind of shook the Biennale as an institution and started to basically the Biennale to think about media and new media art from its core, basically. I was talking about the 1970 Biennale because that's basically the first step for this institution in the long journey towards the acceptance of computer art. This Biennale, here you see a map of the Giardini, which is the original site where all the national pavilions were built. The 1970 Biennale was in a way an exception or an anomaly compared to the previous ones. It opened with the aim of offering its public an experimental approach to art, which was a rather different choice from its generally conservative approach. And the main pavilion that you can see here highlighted in green, and here it's like you can see probably a bit better. It hosted a wide exhibition titled Proposals for an Experimental Exhibition, proposte per una esposizione sperimentale, which was an exhibition entirely focused on experimental art. And this included a large selection of early computational art, which featured, for example, artists such as Frieder Nacke, Herbert Franke, the Computer Technique group. Here you see some works that were featuring Herbert Franke, Auro Lecci with some computer graphics. And this is Matrix Multiplication by Frieder Nacke, which was I was very, very proud to bring back to Venice 2 years ago from my exhibition. And Georgnes with these corridor and shutter from 1969. So except for the rare case represented by this 1970 Biennale's experimental show, computer art at the Biennale has since been exhibited only peripherally. So now back to algorithmic science. This exhibition represents basically the first attempt after the 1970 Biennale to bring early computational art and some of its most prominent pioneers back to Venice. The exhibition took place at the Fondazione Bevilaqua La Masa in their historical gallery in St. Mark's Square and opened in October 2 years ago. The idea of the show was to explore the history of pioneering generative art and its contribution to contemporary art from the 1960s to the present. And this history is exemplified by the work of Ernest Edmonds, Manfred Mohr, Vera Molnar, Frida Nake, and Roman Verosco. And just to give you some background about the foundation, here is a shot that shows the main gallery in St. Mark's Square. The Bevilaqua Foundation is a historical institution that was founded just a few years after the Venice Biennale in 1898 with the aim of promoting contemporary art and supporting all those artists that found it hard to exhibit in major museums. The gallery is located in St. Mark's Square under a loggia in a Renaissance building that has been restored and now houses the main exhibiting space of the foundation. It's about 300 square meters, spread into 2 floors, for a total of 6 rooms and a large corridor. The exhibition included works lent by the artists and by private collectors, including the Anne and Michael Spalter Digital Art Collection, and the V&A was also instrumental in the lending of 2 works, and other works came from a number of private galleries in London, Paris, and Berlin. I'm going to show you some pictures, because 2 years ago when I came here to teach, the exhibition... Oh, come on. Excuse me. That's fine. The exhibition was still going on, and I didn't have any official photographs of the show. So I'm just taking this opportunity to show you a few proper shots. The exhibition featured 60 artworks, and including 4 site-specific installations. And here you see one, it's Manfred Mohr's painted steel sculptural elements in the gallery entrance. We had Vera Molnar and her installation inspired by 13 variations of Mount Saint-Victoire. And we had Ernest Edmonds at the end of this large corridor, and he installed shaping space. Well, this is actually a generative interactive piece called Growth and Form that was installed in the foyer area, and it interacted with the visitors entering the gallery. And then we had one more piece from Ernest, which is titled Shaping Space, which was installed as an immersive, interactive installation in a separate room, completely dark. We then had 2 newly commissioned works, and one was Growth and Form by Ernest Edmonds, and the other is this one here, Roman Verosco's San Marco Apocalypse. And then we had an 8-hour video documentation that demonstrates how an algorithmic drawing is made. So as I mentioned before, with this exhibition, I was keen to introduce one of the histories of this dynamic but almost unexplored field of contemporary art to a new and wider audience. One way to do this was to select artists that I've been working on and that I have been knowing personally for a very long time. And I was lucky enough to visit the artists in their studios, as you can see here, and to make a selection of the works with them. So here you can see me with Vera sitting on the floor of her studio while we were selecting the works, and with Roman in London, where I basically couldn't resist and take a selfie with him in between shots of the documentary that we filmed. And also I recorded hours of interviews with them. And these, together with other documentation material, are now collected in a book that will be published next year by Springer. This book, The Algorithmic Dimension, will be a sort of documentation of the exhibition. So you will see all the official photographs of the curatorial project, but also the maps and the place where every work was put in the gallery, and the transcript of the interviews with the artists. So I think it's going to be exciting. So once the selection was made and all bureaucratic issues were solved, the works were sent to Venice and the real adventure started. Now, getting the works to central Venice was probably one of the most fun but also challenging parts of the whole curatorial project. In Venice, art transportation means that you literally get a boat and you sail to take the works wherever you need to. And I took this picture the morning when we went to collect all the artworks. And when I posted this online and on social media, I kind of spooked some of the lenders. But that's how transportation works in Venice. So everything was totally fine. So after fighting with the highly trafficked Grand Canal, which is always like crowded with singing gondoliers and water taxis and commercial boats, the works arrived in the gallery and we started installation. So this is a shot that I took from the boat. And that you see here is the back entrance of the foundation of the gallery. So all the works had to be transported there by water, basically. And here I think I've got a few more shots. So this is the way we transported all the 60 works. And yeah, a bit more details. So one of the first works to be installed was a work by Manfred Mohr, based on a sequence of 15 elements of painted steel made in 1993. They are usually arranged as a text, as part of an alphabet. But when Manfred saw the space, he decided to arrange the pieces in a sort of matrix, and he was kind of pleased about that, as you can see here. We were also very, very excited to install a work by Vera Molnar and her homage to Cézanne, which you can see here, and I've got more details here. And next to her 13 variations of Mount Saint-Victor, which is a work that she made between 1989 and 1996. And here is a proper shot of the variations. And we were also kind of moved and excited to exhibit for the first time in Venice one of her most moving works, Lettres à ma mère, which is a series of works that Molnar created with the aid of a computer and a plotter to recreate the handwriting of her mother between 1981 and 1990. Then, as I said, we had this site-specific installation at the entrance that interacts with the visitors entering the gallery. And one site-specific installation that took an unpredictable turn and generated some kind of happy accidents, like this one, was this Shaping Space installation by Ernest Edmonds. This is an immersive installation created in 2012 with the support of the Henry Moore Foundation. I've got more pictures here, and this is an interactive generative installation that takes data from a camera, which is directed into the space in front of the two back projected suspended perspex screens, and calculates the amount of activity in front of it. This data is used to modify a set of rules that are continuously updating a pattern of colors and on the screens, so that the works develops and changes over time. The generative software connected to the movement of participants creates dynamic images in space. Large reflections would appear on the walls. And I didn't tell you this morning, but this summer I published an article in this book that is called Museums and Digital Culture, and I'll make sure you'll have a copy here in the library. And this is where Ernest, Edmonds, and I had a discussion, and we recorded everything. We transcribed our conversation, and this is where we talk about the various iterations of this particular installation in the span of like 5 to 10 years. So it's interesting to see his perspective on the various versions that this work had in various venues. So if you're interested, you can read it. And here's another shot taken in the gallery. This room was dedicated to Friedernacke, and I'm particularly pleased that we could bring one of his most celebrated works, Matrix Multiplication, back in Venice after 50 years since it was first exhibited at the 1970 Biennale. And you can see a detail here. And then we had a room dedicated to Roman Verosco, which includes a rare example of a pre-computer work influenced by abstract expressionism that Roman made in 1963, that you can see there on the left corner. And we were lucky to have on display an 8-hour video documentation that shows how his algorithmic poetry drawings are made. And this was quite popular with school kids who visited the show and were really excited to see how a drawing is made, like physically. Then, yes, this is the video that I showed this morning. And this was an original derivation of the law printed text with computer-generated images, again by Roman, and then this work that we commissioned to him, inspired by St. Mark, which was the site where the exhibition took place. In terms of documentation of this exhibition, we worked on several projects. Some of them are still in progress. The most obvious one was the publication of the catalog, and you can, I have a copy somewhere in my bag, so if you like to see it, just tell me after the class. And in order to make the exhibition available to a wider audience, I decided to do something a bit out of my comfort zone, and I decided to make a video, which is something completely new to me. And this included the behind the scenes and interviews with the artists that helped to frame their work and their experience in this particular setting and venue. So I know that some of you have seen this video already, but I will show it again for those who joined online, so bear with me. Oh, you can't see it.
No.
Do you know the trick? Is it the... Oh. No. Sorry.
No, because not really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, was it the one?
No. Yeah. Bravissimo.
But people do not understand this. It's impossible to understand what the hell is algorithmic science. Algorithmic science refers in the term sign to those creatures that, I believe, determine our current culture. Our culture is no longer determined so much by things, much more by processes, however by processes of a semiotic kind. Semiotics, the field of science. So our life has become more and more determined by sign processes, and taking this up in the term algorithmic sign, in the title of this exhibition, this to me is, at least implicitly, a clear signal, a statement about what the things shown here in static ways, most of them, there are a few moving, these static images show a principle, I believe, a principle that in itself is not so important. When that principle is put to movement, then it becomes important. If I was writing a novel, in that novel this exhibition would appear, and it would appear as the last of its kind, computer-generated pictures on walls of a gallery, whereas outside we would see also computer-generated pictures, however moving, dynamic, projected into passages of maybe onto these Venice buildings, no? Destroying them, but only by light. No? They become the carriers of new sign processes. That is what I believe the future of these images will be.
I originally come from abstract expressionism, so I had nothing to do with the computer or whatever. And also from music. And music is sort of my biggest influence. And since music is abstract, my visuals were always abstract. So I was never interpreting the world, I wanted to create a world. So I always had the idea, how could I rationalize my thinking in a way that I know before I start what I want to do. Only when I found the literature from Max Spencer in the late 50s, early 60s, who wrote books about art criticism, and also that we should make a rational art. And I said, rational art is exactly what I want to do. And it's only in the 1967, I met 'Bales, which is the French composer, and he made computer music. And he explained me how he proceeded. He writes little programs which he calls up, and they create a system. And that's exactly what I have to do too. Venice, at this moment, has the biennial, so it's almost like you're feeling like you're part of the biennial. And it's a fantastic building, a fantastic room with shows. You have to show it in a way that people are quiet and can contemplate. Because our work, we're doing all of this work, is more contemplating than expressing movement, and that reflects that our thinking reflects the work that we need a quiet space and a contemplating space. That's perfect.
I always feel great about being in Venice, and I guess I'm not unusual about that. It's great to show my work here, both because it's in such a wonderful city with such a great tradition, but also because it's in a great context with my friends we all started using computers and algorithms in our art at roughly the same period. And I think that my work, and I think all of our works, are much enriched by being seen in this context. I was very interested in the rigorous use of algorithms because I was interested in the philosophy of mathematics and the importance of the algorithm and the invention of computation as a new concept in human thinking. So it seemed to me that it provided an opportunity for a new conceptualization of ourselves and aesthetics. And so that was the main thing, really, that it offered, which became a lifelong pursuit for me, and not only me, of course.
There is one I prefer. There it is in order. And my idea is, I intend to make a publication of these things, to make 9 little piece of toile builder canvas, and you can change them. So if somebody buy it, he has to sign a paper for me that at least every month he will change the place of the, not to let it so.
I love Venice, and I think it's very appropriate because of the Renaissance. So, in the Renaissance, artists brought together science and art, perspective, mathematics into art. It all came together in one amazing, amazing revolution in the arts. And I think the computers are the same thing. In the arts, it brought together the right side and the left side of the brain, mathematical ways of thinking, visual ways of thinking. So I think it's a very appropriate place to be having the show.
Using the algorithm, which is now universal and unprecedented in the history of humanity, to create art, said that this is going to be something that in 100 years' time, people will be interested in. Now, thanks to your curation and Stefano Pilato here at the Foundation Bevilaqua, it's coming to life to be able to walk in the ancient steps of Venice in the Piazza St. Marco and then to see Vera Molnar, Frieder Nake, Roman Verazco, Manfred Moore, and Mr. Ernest Edmonds is profound and exciting.
Okay, now let me see if I can go back to the presentation. Okay, so if you want to rewatch it, like for the third time, it's online on YouTube, so you can just type Algorithmic Science and it should appear quite immediately. So let me just check. Basically, Algorithmic Science was an investigation of the history of computer art. It was also a way to explore the most recent developments of computer art made by the same artists that have pioneered this field over 50 years ago. And it was a way of giving them a voice, but also a way to introduce this highly overlooked field of research to a new audience. One of the challenges of this exhibition was to open up new perspectives on computational art. And the works on display reveal how human thought could be amplified by machines and could raise our consciousness to a higher level of comprehension, both intellectually and visually. They capture the spirit of the time, but show at the same time how this field is still alive and kicking. So by capturing the spirit of the time when the first experiments in computational art took place, and by looking at the developments of computer programming in art up to the present time, Algorithmic Science also revealed a link, often overlooked, that connects the work of the 5 exhibiting artists to past artistic traditions. In particular, the carefully structured and organized works in Algorithmic Science demonstrate unequivocal affinities with the tradition of constructivism, the modern art movement that began in Russia in the early 20th century, based on the supremacy of the functionality of the art object over its exteriors, appearance, and composition. Constructivism inspired artists to explore the potentials of modern materials and their role in expressing a new dynamism and in modern life. So similarly to the way Vladimir Tatlin, one of the founding figures of constructivism, explored the potential of new materials in his creations, Edmonds, Moore, Molnar, Nake, and Verosco have investigated the materiality of the art object, and its organizing structures in the context of computing technologies. So with their rational methods, these artists have also enabled a fuller understanding of the creative process, and they represent the missing tassel of the mosaic that connects this multifaceted and sophisticated line of research, and that links the past and future of media art. Now, to go back to my current interests, I started to be, just after I curated algorithmic science, I started to be interested in sound art, and I was kind of pushed to write something about it when I sent a proposal to the Media Art History Conference that took place this year in Denmark. The theme was sound art, and I was expecting like an audience of experts on sounds only, but luckily we were all in the same boat. We were all researchers and scholars dealing with media art history from several perspectives, and for most of us sound was a new thing, so I kind of felt happy about that. So I presented a paper where I talked about my new interest. So this started basically when I curated algorithmic science and I started recording interviews with the artists. One of them, Manfred Moore, told me the story of how he originally decided to look into computers for his art in the late 60s. And I was completely struck by the fact that it was French computer music composer Pierre Barbeau who inspired him. They first met in 1967, and after that, Moore started to program his first computer drawings in 1969. This is part of the interview that I recorded with him and that I'm using for my research. So in a way, you understand how my research informs my curatorial practice, and it kind of feeds more into, it gives me more inspiration for my future projects. And you can see here, Manfred stated, it was only in 1967 when I met Pierre Barbeau, a pioneer of computer music, that I finally understood that I had to write algorithms and programs, a logical procedure which runs on a computer to create a rational construct. And that entity was exactly what I was looking for. I started learning programming, and within 1 year, I was ready to write my first program. So one of the works by Manfred that I selected with him for this exhibition is P036, White Noise, which is a computer-generated algorithmic plotter drawing here. Is this the one? Yes. So a drawing from this program was dedicated to Pierre Barbeau with the inscription. So it was a strong influence for Manfred. This belongs to the early period of his algorithmic works, and in which he worked with automated and logical image constructions. In this case, the algorithm has different qualities and operates randomly, creating an alphabet consisting of lines or angled elements that in turn create a sort of abstract text. Since then, Manfred Moore's passion for serialism and rhythm has been a constant source of inspiration and still resonates in his most recent works, such as this one, Artificiata II, which is a series of computer-generated real-time algorithmic animations that take Moore's visual research into what he describes as visual music, in a music score-like flow. And again, I selected one of the works from this series for the Venice exhibition. When I curated algorithmic science, I also noticed that most of the questions I was asked during and after the show from the press, but also from visitors and students, were about the musical inspirations that these artists may have had. And I was really fascinated by the fact that these questions came from a non-specialized audience, meaning that certain connections between the visual generative algorithmic art and the influence of, for example, serialism and serial music composition are actually visible. For example, one of the comments I got from a very young artist visiting the exhibition was that he found almost spontaneous to associate some of the compositions by Vera Molnar and Friedernacke to some sonic influences that he finds in contemporary electronic music. So I started investigating these issues further. So first of all, and I know that it may sound trivial, but I realized that Vera's work has been used on several occasions as cover to albums I'm now looking into this because it's kind of intriguing. And they could be possibly inspirations from Vera to pioneering of electronic music. So they've been used both by pioneers of electronic music, such as Pauline Oliveros and David Tudor, but also by very young generation of artists and composers, like, for instance, Mélène Dalibert, that you can see in the bottom image. The other thing is that thanks to these comments and discussions that I had after the show was over, is that I started to look at the second generation of artists inspired by algorithmic and generative art. And I realized how much some of them have been inspired by a number of female sound artists. And I mean, it was great for me to learn that most of pioneers of ambient and electronic music from the 60s across the early 80s were women. So Hélène Rodrigue, Laurie Spiegel, Pauline Oliveros, and many, many others. So this is, again, a new area of research that I'm really interested in. One of the artists that I'm working with now that has been influenced by some of these artists is Peter Bales. He's a Belgian-born interdisciplinary artist working on the intersection of computer science and the arts. He develops generative systems in music, the visual arts, and hybrid formats. I'd like to show you one of his pieces if you're interested. He's been inspired by a number of female artists, composers, and performers like Jack Hawkes, Laurie Spiegel, and Pauline Oliveros. And for all these specific inspirations and connections between Peter's and Peter's generative algorithmic art and sound, there is no bibliography yet. So I've started recording interviews again with Peter to know more about this. And so I hope I'll be able to present something maybe in the near future. So my original research on the algorithms now took me to this. So for the time being, I will just show you one of Peter's works that I find really interesting. Let's see if it works. Guys. And I think it includes some explanation that you can read on screen. So all of this is a sort of spoiler of my next curatorial project for the Biennale, hopefully in 2021. The idea is to celebrate 50 years of computer art at the Biennale, starting from the 1970 experimental show. So the exhibition will offer both a historical survey and a contemporary take on generative art production by the artists who pioneered this field of artistic inquiry from the mid-60s and by the younger generation of artists that are working with the latest technology. And in the curatorial project, I plan to integrate, of course, sound art, and because I'm interested in documentation practice, I'd be interested in investigating new ways of documenting dimensions of these works that are often overlooked, such as the human-computer interaction and the audience engagement. As for the Venice Biennale and its relationship with media art, both sound and visual, as you can imagine, it's a troubled one. I've been consistently visiting the Venice Biennale since 2007. And this year, because my next project is going to be there, I visited the Biennale with a more clinical eye, scouting for locations, but also looking at how media art is curated and exhibited there. So I'm not going to talk about the history of contemporary art in Venice, because we've covered that already. But just to say, historically speaking, the Venice Biennale has not been exactly a place for experimentation and cutting-edge art. I've been quite critical about this when I analyzed the history of media art at the Biennale. And I keep noticing that even recently, how rare it has been for the Biennale to show media art in a way that is meaningful and not just like as an empty spectacle. I was talking about the 1970 Biennale when I started the class. It was an exceptional example of art created in the day when computer pioneers were experimenting with computer graphics. And that Biennale also included a 3-day symposium that was focused on computer music. And it was directed by it was a more traditional musicologist and composer, Pietro Grossi, which was the first Italian musician to conduct successful research in computer music. He introduced to the audience the digital computer music program, which was a system through which a computer could read and process musical score. And he gave demonstrations. So that was another good example of how the Biennale reacted in 1970 to media art. So going back to the Biennale now, this year, after many years of disappointments, the Biennale has been surprisingly inspiring to me, at least, and interesting from what I could see. There were many examples of sound art or art installations that included sound as an integral part of the work. That I found fascinating this year. There was Ryoji Ikeda, the Japanese pavilion, the German pavilion. I'd like to show you just one last example, and then you can ask me questions. I found this kind of indicative of the increased interest in sound at the Biennale, and hopefully a sign that there is still space for exhibiting real contemporary art in places that have not been usually that open to the new, like the Biennale. This is Thomas Saraceno Acqua Alta, a sound work which draws on the new alarm system developed by the city of Venice to warn residents about high water. Basically, 16 sirens are spread around the city to warn that Acqua Alta is expected to appear within 2 to 4 hours. And the tones rise in correspondence to the 4 levels of floating. So this work, Saraceno's work, speculates on how the floating city might sound in 100 years when its vulnerable ecology have been completely submerged because of overexploitation of the soil and water. So 6 speakers acoustically expand basically they wrapped the space of the Arsenal waters in a 6-hour cycle. I'm going to show you, first of all, just to give you an example of what the actual siren is. This is the alarm that I recorded personally 2 weeks ago in St. Mark's Square at 5:30 a.m. in the morning, when the water was estimated to reach 140 centimeters from the sea level. So that means that there was a 4-tone siren warning residents that the water was coming up in the next 4 hours. So this is how it sounds when you live there. And it doesn't work. Let me just get the file. Let me just check. I think it's this. So I just recorded this from a window. And you can see the 4 tones going up. So this is repeated 3 or 4 times. And again, as I said, it varies according to the level of the forecast. And I'm going to show you the actual work that Saraceno made using this sound, and he interpreted in his work here. This is a bit cheesy, so I'm going to skip this. You can't see it. Can you help me with this, because there's a video. Sorry. Okay. So this is at the Arsenal, and this sound was recorded and then installed in this kind of space, empty space. I was really interested by this work because we were talking about documentation earlier on, and as part of this work, there are the scores of these sounds exhibited next to it. So it's kind of interesting to see how the visual and the sound interact together. So it goes on and on and on continuously. And I think it was also a very timely project, considering what happened to Venice in the past 3 weeks. And this work has been just, the Biennale just closed last week. So I think it was a kind of important work for the Biennale at this time. So I think the recording of this class stops anyway, like now or like in a few minutes. So I will stop talking here, but this was just a way to show you how my research informs my curatorial projects and how I worked till today and what my project will be. So thank you for that. Thank you.